You are about to follow one of the most touching and transformative stories in the entire Bible. The journey of a young disciple who heard God's call and decided to pay the price, with his body, with his soul, with his heart. Over the course of 10 exciting episodes, we'll dive into the story of Timothy, the son of a nameless woman, the young man who suffered for the love of the mission, the disciple who remained silent in the face of pain, the man who became Paul's right-hand man, and the leader who learned to love even in moments of rejection. Prepare for tears, confrontations, challenged faith, and redemption. This is not just a story about courage. It's about real faith, about the price of obedience, and about how God transforms anonymous people into pillars of faith. Subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and follow each chapter of this unprecedented series that will touch your soul and change your perspective on calling. This is the story of Timothy, the story of a heart that chose not to turn back. Chapter 1. The young man who heard the voice of the Apostle Paul. He grew up among whispered prayers and ancient promises, a son of a Jewish mother and a Greek father, rejected by some, ignored by others. But one day, while carrying a bucket of water, a voice called his name. It was not his mother's voice. It was not the voice of the synagogue elders. It was the voice of an apostle, and with it came a calling that would change his life forever. But before leaving on his mission, Timothy had to face something no one expected, a demand that involved not only faith but pain. It wasn't enough to follow Paul. It was necessary to sacrifice his own flesh. And it all began with a question. Are you ready to walk? Who was this quiet young man whom God was secretly preparing? What did he hear from Paul's lips that changed everything? And why did he need to be wounded before proclaiming healing? In this true and moving story, you will discover the moment Timothy heard the voice so many prayed to hear, and what he had to surrender to obey that call. The house where Timothy grew up stood on the corner of a dusty street in the city of Lystra, a city forgotten by many, but not by God. Located in the region of Lycaonia, part of ancient Asia Minor, it was a simple place, surrounded by barren hills and an almost always clear sky. The house was made of rough stone and clay, the roof covered with dry branches, the walls marked by time. There was no beauty to human eyes, but there was reverence within. In this house lived 3 lives united by faith. Lois, the grandmother, was a woman of prayer, wise from time and loss. Eunice, the mother, was steadfast with serene eyes and calloused hands. And lastly, Timothy, the son who listened more than he spoke. From a young age, his presence was quiet, but he carried an inner strength that only heaven could perceive. They had no material wealth. Their clothes were sewn by hand. Their food came from their own labor, and the walls creaked with the evening wind. But what sustained that house was invisible: faith, hope, and a silent expectation that God still worked among the simple. Timothy did not know his father as he knew his mother. His father was a Greek, someone distant from the faith perhaps. Present in the beginning, but absent in the family's soul. Only his name and the memory of a face faded by time remained. The boy grew up between 2 worlds, the firmness of Jewish tradition and the emptiness of his pagan heritage. It wasn't easy, but God had planted something in him that no culture could erase. From a very young age, Timothy listened to the teachings of the Torah with impressive respect. His grandmother spoke of Moses, Elijah, David, men who spoke with God and obeyed even without understanding. His mother read aloud the texts of the prophets, and he listened to every word as if it were spoken just for him. Even without knowing it, he was being molded. Every story was a seed, every prayer a calling. But despite the routine of faith and obedience, something within Timothy was restless. While the hills of Lystra remained immobile, something in his heart stirred. He saw the other young men playing, making plans, talking about trade, marriage, or land. But he wanted more. He didn't know what. He only knew that life, however right it might be, was not the end. Lystra, in itself, was a portrait of oblivion. Its dirt roads, its silent squares, its predictable markets, everything seemed to go in circles. The elders repeated old stories, the merchants discussed the same prices, the flocks followed the same trails. It was a city that lived, but didn't. Dream, that breathed, but didn't hope. But Timothy hoped. At night, lying in silence, he looked at the clay ceiling and listened to the sound of the wind blowing through the cracks. He closed his eyes and imagined what it would be like to hear the voice of God, not just through the scriptures, but directly, like the men he admired in the ancient texts. Does the Lord still speak like that? He wondered. Does he still call the little ones? This restlessness was his secret prayer. No one knew, but he spoke to God when he carried water, when he lit the fire, when he watched the fields. His silence was not empty. It was sacred. The neighbors respected him. The community leaders knew of his conduct. It was not common to see a young man with such reverence, such purity. He was not exalted, but he was constant. And that was enough for God to look at him attentively. And it was in this setting that eternity began to stir. There was no thunder. There was no lightning. But in the midst of the monotony of Lystra, a different man appeared. A man with marks on his body, visible scars, intense eyes. His name was Paul. And with him came a voice, not just of teaching, but of mission. Timothy didn't know it yet, but that man carried within him an answer he had long awaited. But something was about to interrupt this silence. Paul had arrived. With his deep eyes, his firm voice, and his body marked by persecution, he did not seem like an ordinary man. And indeed, he wasn't. Wherever he went, he left traces of faith, division, and conversion. And now he was there, in Lystra, precisely in the land where a young man for years had been formed in silence. But before any encounter, it is necessary to return to the root. Timothy's faith wasn't built in squares or synagogues. It was built at home. It was in the hands of Eunice, his mother, and in the firm words of Lois, his grandmother, that he learned to fear God. Without fanfare, without applause, just faithfulness. From a very young age, he listened to the texts of the law, recited the Psalms, and knew the promises of the prophets. It wasn't an obligation, it was life. His father's absence accompanied him like a subtle shadow, a Greek, indifferent to faith, distant from the mission. Timothy didn't see him as an example. His name was present, but his spirit was not. And perhaps it was this absence that further strengthened his attachment to the two women who raised him. Eunice never spoke with bitterness. She never poisoned her son's heart against his father. On the contrary, when Timothy asked, "Mother, why didn't he stay?" she simply replied, "Because some leave, so that God has room to draw closer." Lois, more direct, would say, "God never builds on cracked foundations, but he can even use the shards to make something new." Timothy listened and kept it to himself. He was always more of a listener than a talker. But within him a flame grew, a thirst that not even knowledge of the scriptures could quench. He felt there was something more, a purpose perhaps, a mission. He was respected in the synagogue. The elders praised his posture, his purity, his constancy. The other young people, however, didn't understand him. They said he was too serious. But Timothy knew it wasn't seriousness, it was preparation. And even without fully understanding, he waited. Eunice noticed her son's eyes, frequently looking at the sky. "What do you see up there?" she asked. "I think I'm waiting to hear what my eyes cannot see," he replied. She smiled. "Perhaps silence is the rehearsal for a voice too big to be spoken all at once." In the days that followed, Paul's presence began to impact the city. He didn't just preach, he burned from within. He spoke of Jesus, the Messiah, as one who had known him face to face. He spoke of grace, repentance, salvation. And with that, hearts began to tremble. The city, which had always lived in repetition, now heard something new. Timothy listened to every word from afar. He didn't approach yet, but something inside him cried out. That voice, there was something about it. It carried the same weight he felt when he read the prophets. It was as if that voice were a continuation of what his mother and grandmother had always preached. That afternoon, returning from the well, he asked his mother, "Mother, if God wants to use me, how will I know?" She placed her hand on her son's shoulder and said firmly, "You won't know completely, but when the voice comes, you will recognize it." What if I'm not ready? If he calls you, it's because you already are. Timothy swallowed hard. His heart beat fast, for no apparent reason. Or rather, for a reason he couldn't yet name. That night, lying on his mat, he looked once more at the clay ceiling. He felt that the waiting time was running out. What was once a seed now blossomed. What was once preparation now demanded action. And then came the moment that would mark the beginning of everything. But the faith planted by them would flourish in a land that no one expected. And with him came a divine answer to the silence that Timothy had kept in his chest for so long. But before the answer manifested itself, Timothy needed to face the biggest battle, the one that resided within him. Since childhood, he had known he was different, not because of talent, not because of appearance, but because of origin. The faith he carried connected him to his mother, but the blood that ran through his veins connected him to his father, and with him a distant land, an absent belief, a silence that had never been filled. He was half Jewish and half Greek, and this placed him daily between two worlds. In the synagogue, there was respect, but never complete acceptance. The more traditional ones looked at him cautiously. They never said it clearly, but it was as if they were thinking, "Good boy." But his father, Greek. At home, however, Eunice never allowed that look to define him. "You are a son of the Most High, Timothy." And that is worth more than any earthly lineage. Even so, there were times when he felt between two worlds, like someone who didn't completely belong anywhere. One afternoon, while helping Lois organize the small garden, he blurted out the question that had been hammering in his chest for some time. "Grandma, can God call someone divided like me?" She wiped her hands on her apron and answered firmly, "God doesn't call pure blood. God calls whole hearts, and yours has been his for a long time." But even though he heard this, there were days when the doubt returned, when he crossed paths with the disapproving looks of the more rigid ones, when he heard the comments about his Greek heritage, when he remembered his father, as absent from his life as from the scriptures. Even so, Timothy remained faithful, not out of pride, but out of love. What he learned from his mother and grandmother was too vivid to be ignored. He continued praying. He continued studying the sacred scrolls. He continued waiting, without even knowing exactly what he was waiting for. Meanwhile, Paul continued preaching in Lystra. His presence cut through the air like a sword. His words touched depths that not even the synagogue leaders dared to touch. He spoke with pain, with power, with truth, and that shook the city. Timothy began to listen more closely. He sat in the shadows, listening to everything, and the more he listened, the more he felt that voice stir something ancient within him. It wasn't just a sermon. It was as if each word were building a bridge between the two worlds that lived inside him. One night, after hearing another message about repentance and the grace of Christ, Timothy returned home with watery eyes. Eunice noticed. "Is everything all right?" "I am. I'm just different." She came closer and hugged him without saying anything else. A mother who sometimes understands what her son cannot explain. In the following days, something changed. He felt it upon waking, while walking through the streets, while touching the earth. It was as if he were being observed, not with judgment, but with purpose. And then it happened. Paul entered the house of a known believer, and after some time in prayer, turned to one of the local men and said, "Tell me about the young man named Timothy. He is the son of a faithful Jewish woman, but his father was Greek. I want to meet him." And so at the end of that afternoon, Timothy heard his name called out loud by someone outside for the first time. "Timothy, the apostle wants to see you." He stopped. The bucket of water he was carrying trembled in his hands. His heart pounded. For a moment, all the thoughts of his childhood, all the doubts, all the fears resurfaced. Would he really be called? With this past, with this divided blood, he wiped his hands, took a deep breath, and walked on. Before we continue, we ask for your collaboration. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to bless us and continue bringing these profound stories from the Bible to more hearts. Now we continue with Timothy's journey of faith, the young man who heard God's voice in the silence of Lystra. Timothy didn't know what to expect. He had never been summoned by someone like Paul. That simple sentence, "The apostle wants to see you," seemed to echo in the corners of his soul. The way to the house where Paul was staying was short, but his steps felt longer, heavier. His heart pounded in his chest like a drum. The streets of Lystra were bustling that afternoon, not because of commerce, nor the arrival of some Roman official, but because of Paul. Wherever he went, eyes turned towards him, some with admiration, others with doubt, others with fear. his reputation as a preacher, missionary, and even survivor of persecutions preceded him. But amidst so much attention, it was his gaze that fell upon Timothy. When Timothy entered the house, he saw a tired man with a steady gaze and serene expression. Paul was sitting in the shade, surrounded by some brothers. He didn't look like someone seeking honor or attention. He looked like someone carrying a weight, a calling that both ached and burned. Paul raised his eyes, and when he fixed them on the young man, time seemed to stop. "Are you Timothy?" "I am, sir." "I've heard of you," Paul said without preamble, but with warmth in his voice. "Your faith is well known. Your life is a testament. But tell me, are you ready to walk?" Timothy swallowed hard. That wasn't a typical question. It wasn't about where he lived, what he did, or who his father was. It was about something much deeper. "Walk where?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Where the gospel leads you, where the kingdom needs you. Walk with me, but above all, walk with the Lord." The silence that followed seemed sacred. The room, previously filled with murmurs, grew quiet, and it was in that moment that Timothy heard the voice that changed the wind. It wasn't Paul's voice. It was the voice within him, a voice that didn't come from his ears, but from his soul. It was as if everything he had lived up to that point, Eunice's teachings, Lois's stories, the solitary prayers, converged at that exact moment. The answer he had been searching for so long didn't come in the form of an explanation, but of direction. Yes, he wanted to go. Yes, he wanted to follow. But with that, fear arose. Am I worthy? Paul seemed to sense the inner battle and spoke gently, "If the Lord calls you, he will equip you." It's not about deserving, it's about obeying. That day, for the first time, Timothy felt peace within his division. The son of a Jewish woman and a Greek man, raised between two worlds, he now understood. God wasn't calling him in spite of that. God was calling him because of it. He would be a bridge. He would be an answer. He would be part of something that began long before him and would continue long after. As he left the house, the wind blew differently. The city was still the same, but Timothy was no longer the same. He knew something had changed. But before leaving with Paul, before beginning the journey, something still needed to be addressed, and Paul knew it. In a more private conversation, he explained, "Timothy, there is something you need to do, not for salvation, but for love of those we will reach. You are the son of a Greek, and among the Jews, this can be a stumbling block." The young man understood immediately. His heart tightened. "Are you asking me to prepare, to give up, to sacrifice for the love of the gospel?" He lowered his eyes. He felt the weight of the decision. It wasn't just a spiritual choice. It was something that would stir his flesh, his dignity, his past. And yet, he didn't hesitate. And it was to himself that that voice wanted to speak. Even knowing that Paul's request involved pain, embarrassment, and renunciation, he didn't ask for time to think. He just lowered his head and said, "If this is necessary to avoid causing offense, I will do it." Paul saw that and remained silent for a few moments. It was as if something within him was confirmed. The young man's firmness didn't come from the flesh. It wasn't pride nor haste. It was surrender. Later, while talking with the local brothers of the community, Paul heard even more about Timothy. One of them said, "Since he was little, this boy has been different, quiet but attentive. He never strayed from the faith, even with his father absent." Another added, "When many young people sought the ways of the world, he sought the ways of God. Even with doors half closed because of his background, he remained pure." Paul listened attentively, but his gaze remained fixed on the horizon. What he heard only confirmed what he already discerned in the Spirit. There was more than a devout young man there. There was a hidden but latent calling. The next morning, as he went out with Timothy to walk in the hills of Lystra, Paul spoke calmly, "You have something that many mature men do not, constancy. And this comes from the faith that has resided in your house for generations. Lois, Eunice, now you." Timothy didn't know what to answer. He walked with his eyes downcast, but inside, something warmed. Paul then stopped, placed his hand on the young man's shoulder and said, "You are not only the fruit of what you have learned, you are the answer to what has been sown." These words penetrated deeply. Paul, who had been a persecutor of the church, knew how to recognize when God was raising someone up. And the more he observed Timothy, the more he saw beyond the fragile appearance. He saw courage without fanfare, maturity without presumption, hunger without ambition. It was as if the Lord had been preparing him for a long time, and now he was delivering the fruit to the apostle. The city of Lystra began to talk. Some wondered if Timothy would leave his mother. Others, if he was truly ready. But for Paul, the matter was already settled, not by what others said, but by what his spiritual eyes saw. That same day, Paul called the elders of the community to witness something important. Before them, he placed his hands on Timothy and declared, "This young man will be my companion in the work. We will go together, and what God has begun in him, he himself will complete." And as they prayed, Timothy's eyes closed. But within him, everything opened. A new time was born. He was no longer the boy from Lystra. He was being set apart, consecrated, sent. But before the departure, the sacrifice had to be made. That night, alone at home, Timothy was silent. He looked at his mother, who was preparing dinner with trembling hands. She already knew. Without needing to explain, she embraced him, wept softly and said, "You are no longer just my son. Now you belong to the world. Go where God leads you." He didn't answer. He just squeezed his eyes shut, trying to hold back the tears. And so the next day, Timothy was circumcised, not out of legalistic obligation, but out of love for the Jews, out of wisdom, out of surrender. He wounded his own body so as not to wound the conscience of others. Paul watched everything in silence. When the young man returned, tired but resolute, he embraced him respectfully. And in the apostle's gaze, there was a different gleam, something that said, "You are ready." But what Paul saw was not just a young man, it was a disciple in the making. Even knowing that Paul's request involved pain, embarrassment, and renunciation, he didn't ask for time to think. He just lowered his head and said, "If this is necessary to avoid causing offense, I will do it." Paul saw that and remained silent for a few moments. It was as if something within him was confirmed. The young man's firmness didn't come from the flesh. It wasn't pride nor haste. It was surrender. Later, while talking with the local brothers of the community, Paul heard even more about Timothy. One of them said, "Since he was little, this boy has been different, quiet but attentive. He never strayed from the faith, even with his father absent." Another added, "When many young people sought the ways of the world, he sought the ways of God. Even with doors half closed because of his background, he remained pure." Paul listened attentively, but his gaze remained fixed on the horizon. What he heard only confirmed what he already discerned in the Spirit. There was more than a devout young man there. There was a hidden but latent calling. The next morning, as he went out with Timothy to walk in the hills of Lystra, Paul spoke calmly. "You have something that many mature men do not, constancy. And this comes from the faith that has resided in your house for generations. Lois, Eunice, now you." Timothy didn't know what to answer. He walked with his eyes downcast, but inside something warmed. Paul then stopped, placed his hand on the young man's shoulder and said, "You are not only the fruit of what you have learned, you are the answer to what has been sown." These words penetrated deeply. Paul, who had been a persecutor of the church, knew how to recognize when God was raising someone up. And the more he observed Timothy, the more he saw beyond the fragile appearance. He saw courage without fanfare, maturity without presumption, hunger without ambition. It was as if the Lord had been preparing him for a long time, and now he was delivering the fruit to the apostle. The city of Lystra began to talk. Some wondered if Timothy would leave his mother, others if he was truly ready. But for Paul, the matter was already settled, not by what others said, but by what his spiritual eyes saw. That same day, Paul called the elders of the community to witness something important. Before them, he placed his hands on Timothy and declared, "This young man will be my companion in the work. We will go together, and what God has begun in him, he himself will complete." And as they prayed, Timothy's eyes closed, but within him everything opened. A new time was born. He was no longer the boy from Lystra. He was being set apart, consecrated, sent. But before the departure, the sacrifice had to be made. That night, alone at home, Timothy was silent. He looked at his mother, who was preparing dinner with trembling hands. She already knew. Without needing to explain, she embraced him, wept softly and said, "You are no longer just my son. Now you belong to the world. Go where God leads you." He didn't answer. He just squeezed his eyes shut, trying to hold back the tears. And so the next day Timothy was circumcised, not out of legalistic obligation, but out of love for the Jews, out of wisdom, out of surrender. He wounded his own body so as not to wound the conscience of others. Paul watched everything in silence. When the young man returned, tired but resolute, he embraced him respectfully. And in the apostle's gaze, there was a different gleam. Something that said, "You're ready." But what Paul saw was not just a young man. It was a disciple in the making. That night, Timothy slept peacefully. But sleep didn't come easily. He woke before the sun rose over Lystra. The sky was still dark, but inside him there was already light. He got up quietly, unhurriedly. He knew that every gesture that morning would carry the weight of the last time. He walked through the house. He ran his fingers along the edge of the table where his mother had so often served bread. He stopped before the wooden chest where the scrolls of the scriptures were carefully kept. He rested his hand on the lid and whispered, I will carry them in my heart. Eunice was already up, always before daybreak. This time, however, she wasn't cooking or sewing. She was sitting, facing the window, her eyes lost between the emerging light and the memory of the boy who was now more than just her son. When Timothy approached, she didn't need to ask anything. She knew the day had come. "Did you sleep well?" she asked sweetly. "Yes, Mother. And the wind woke me as if it were him telling me, 'Go.'" She smiled, a small smile but full of a love that held her chest tight within. They remained silent for a few minutes. Sometimes all the deepest love can do is simply exist there without words. Lois entered the room carrying a small linen bag. "I put in some bread and dates. It's not much, but it will remind you of home." "Thank you, Grandma," said Timothy, moved. I don't know how to leave you." She looked at him firmly and replied, "You are not leaving us. You are being sent, and wherever you go, what we have planted will go with you." Eunice stood up. She approached slowly and touched her son's face with both hands. "Timothy, my son, I knew this day would come. I always knew. When you prayed in silence, when you cried for no apparent reason, when you read the scriptures with shining eyes, I knew." She took a deep breath, holding back her tears. "I am your mother, but before me you were his. And now he is calling me back, isn't he? Not back. He's calling you forward, to a path where we will not tread, but you will." The moment of farewell was inevitable. Timothy took his bag. He adjusted his simple tunic. He looked at the door of the house. His feet felt heavy. His legs wanted to follow, but his heart wanted to stay. Eunice then came closer again and hugged him. "Promise you won't forget who you are." "I am a part of you, Mother. I am the fruit of your faith." She tightened her embrace and whispered, "Then go. Go fulfill what God has written for you." At the gate, Paul was already waiting for him in the distance. Arms crossed, he observed in silence. There was no rush. He knew that this moment between mother and son was sacred. Timothy turned around one last time. He saw Lois standing in the doorway's shadow. He saw Eunice holding tight to one of the house's columns with one hand, and her heart with the other. He raised his hand in farewell, without words. She returned the gesture, and then the young man who had heard the voice began to obey it. But the journey hadn't even begun, and it was already costing tears. The wooden gate of Lystra creaked slowly as it closed behind them. The quiet sound echoed like a seal, the separation between the past and what was yet to come. Timothy didn't look back, not out of coldness, but because the faith he carried pulled him forward with the force of a calling that allowed no doubt. Beside him, Paul walked in silence. The two didn't exchange words. The sky still held the soft hues of morning, and the dirt ground began to warm under the first rays of sun. Each step took Timothy further from his home, from his mother, from everything he knew. But each step also led him toward what God had prepared. The road wound through hills and sparse fields. Birds flew overhead, dust rising with the gentle breeze. Paul, accustomed to that rhythm of travel, cast quick glances around, but he wasn't observing the landscape. He was observing Timothy. The young man didn't say anything, but there was weight in his silence. It wasn't hesitation, it was depth. It was as if with each step he reaffirmed his decision, not with his mouth, but with his feet. They stopped by a fig tree to drink some water. Paul knelt by the stream and washed his face. Timothy did the same. Fatigue hadn't yet reached their bodies, but their hearts carried something words couldn't explain. Was it difficult? Paul asked without taking his eyes off the water. Timothy thought for a moment before answering, "It was, but it was necessary. Leaving wasn't a choice, it was a response." Paolo nodded. The young man's sincerity was like a balm. There was no pretense, no doubt. Here was someone ready to lose everything and still go on. "You've already made the first decision," Paolo said. "But there are others that still need to be made, decisions that will cost more than tears." Timothy looked at him, curious. "What is still missing?" Paul stood up, adjusted his tunic, and calmly replied, "You have already been circumcised. You have already left your home. You have already said yes to God. But there is something that men still need to see in you, something that needs to be done before we can go where the Lord will send us." Timothy frowned slightly. "What is it?" Paul took a deep breath and answered honestly, "You have a good testimony among the brothers here. But soon we will be among Jews from other cities, strict men, men who will not look at what you carry, but at what you represent. And the fact that you are the son of a Greek father will still be a stumbling block." Timothy lowered his eyes. He knew this. Since he was a boy, he had lived with this tension. His father's blood had always been a silent obstacle. "So what will we do?" he asked serenely. "We will go to them. We will introduce ourselves. We will show them who you are. But first, you will have to face them not with words, but with renunciation." Timothy didn't hesitate. "If it means the gospel will not find barriers in me, then I am ready." Paul smiled. There was the confirmation of everything he had heard about that young man. It wasn't just faith. It was maturity. The two resumed their walk. Now the silence was different, filled with purpose, with courage, with surrender. At dusk, they sighted the next village, where a Jewish community that knew Paul lived but didn't know Timothy. The reception wouldn't be simple. Many still distrusted Greeks, even when they embraced the faith. Paul looked at the young man beside him. He knew what was coming, and he knew he needed to prepare Timothy, but Paul knew something needed to be done before continuing the journey. The next day dawned cloudy. The wind blew stronger over the dirt trails. The two had left early, even before the birds sang. They were now walking through fields and stones toward a city where the Jews were numerous and zealous. The silence of the walk was broken by Paul. "You know that the Jews have stern eyes." Timothy looked at him attentively. "Yes, since I was a child, I have learned to see that in their faces. And it is not just ill will, it's tradition, it's zeal, it's history. They carry in their veins centuries of commandments, separations, and promises. They were prepared to wait for something, and at the same time to protect what they have." Timothy nodded, understanding, but he expected more. Paul continued, "And now they see men like us, preaching that the Messiah has come, that the promise has been fulfilled, that the cross has overcome the law. For many this sounds like treason, for others like heresy, and for some like madness." The young man took a deep breath. "And I am half Jewish, half Greek. They will look at me and not know where to place me." Paul stopped walking. He turned completely to him. "Precisely because of that, Timothy. You need to be a bridge, and a bridge needs to bear the weight of both sides." These words pierced the young man's heart like an arrow of light. Be a bridge. Unite what is opposed. Bear the weight of the conflict. He understood, but he also feared. "What must I do?" Paul took a deep breath before speaking. "You were recently circumcised. That already aligns you with the covenant. But now we need to go beyond the rite. We need a living renunciation. You will be my voice in places that won't easily hear me. You will go in where I am rejected. But for that, you need to go through a screening." Timothy swallowed hard. "What kind?" Paul looked at the horizon and said, "They will test you. They will ask questions about your father. They will look at you as a foreigner. Some will refuse even to listen to you. And because of that, your body needs to testify what your soul has already decided." The young man understood even before the explanation. It was more than faith. It was identification. It was a seal, not only on the soul, but on the flesh. "Do you mean that there will be another mark?" he asked in a firm voice. "Yes," said Paul. "But now it will not be merely out of obedience to the law. It will be so as not to cause offense. You already belong to the kingdom, but they don't know that yet. And the only way to show it is by giving up something. You have a right to reach those who live bound by duty." Timothy remained silent. The wind rustled the dry leaves around them. The ground crunched beneath their feet. The road seemed narrower now, but within him the decision had already been made. "If I truly am a bridge, then let my body carry the planks of sacrifice." Paul looked at him, not with pity, but with admiration. "You will go far, Timothy, but this first step will hurt." Timothy nodded. "Pain is part of the new birth, isn't it?" "Yes," said Paul, "and this new birth begins today." And the next requirement would touch not only his soul, but his body. The silence between them was sacred. After Paul's words, there was nothing more to explain. It wasn't a requirement imposed by the law. It was a gesture to break down barriers, to open paths, so that the gospel would not encounter resistance. In hearts still bound by traditions, Timothy understood, not with logic, but with the Spirit. God's calling for him now required real marks, the kind that stay on the body, but transform the soul. "If necessary," said the young man firmly, "I don't want my origin to hinder the message I carry." Paul remained silent for a moment. It was the same silence that preceded great beginnings. He knew what was coming. He had already experienced much pain, persecution, imprisonment. But now, there before him, was something rarer than courage. A broken heart, ready to obey. The afternoon fell slowly. They found a stone shelter near a small stream, a simple place, almost hidden, the kind of setting God always chose for great transformations. The moment arrived, and Timothy did not back down. With clean cloths, olive oil, and fresh water, Paul prepared everything. The young man lay down on a smooth stone, his gaze fixed on the sky. There was no audience. There were no praises, only the pure and silent obedience of someone who had said yes to God and was now proving it with his own body. The circumcision was performed carefully, and even though the pain was sharp, Timothy did not murmur. He endured each second as an intimate sacrifice. Like a secret altar where lambs were not offered, but one's own flesh, not out of obligation, but out of love. After the act, Paul cared for the wounds. He applied oil, covered them with linen, and helped the young man lie down in the shade. Timothy's face was pale, sweaty, but calm. The silence now was different. It was no longer one of waiting. It was one of fulfillment. "You have been faithful, even before preaching a single word," said Paul. "I preached with my body," replied Timothy in a low voice, "so that no one else needs to stumble over my name." The following hours were spent resting. Timothy slept for a while, exhausted but at peace. When he woke up, the sky was already darkening. The stars began to shine above the field, and the campfire crackled softly. Paul watched him in silence. And finally, he asked the question that would mark the beginning of the new stage. "Are you ready to walk with me?" Timothy took a deep breath, feeling his body throb, but his spirit burned like fire. "I am, if it is God's will." Paul looked at him with tenderness and firmness, and with a voice full of experience he said, "Then prepare yourself. The price of beginning is higher than you imagine." And as Paul's voice echoed in his heart, Timothy simply nodded. He didn't know what awaited him, but he decided to trust. He said, "Yes," without understanding the price. But in the next chapter, he will discover that following God requires more than words. In the next chapter, Timothy will face the blade of sacrifice, a pain he didn't need to suffer, but accepted for love of the mission. Will faith be enough to endure the cut? Don't miss episode 2. The pain. He didn't have to suffer. He hurt himself for the love of God. This story will touch the deepest part of your heart.